Good morning and welcome to
Morning.
the first. It is good morning in the first of the series of our brand designs podcast series from the Armory and Quickfire Digital. I'm here with myself and Nathan Lomax, and we're going to be joined very shortly by Ralph from IKO Drinks, and we're just going to talk a little bit today around what it's like to be a founder, what it's like to go through the process of setting up a new brand and kind of bringing that to market and launching. So just very quickly, I'd like to welcome Ralph to the room. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks.
Good, and I'm loving the sporting of your own kind of merch there. That's pretty sweet.
The merch, yeah.
Let's use every excuse to get a brand into every image. You've got to do it, haven't you? Let's be honest.
Right.
So I bet you've got a drink to one side there, possibly.
Yeah, I do. Of course. Yeah, it's appropriate as well in the morning. It's a perfect pickup.
So you are the owner-founder of IKO Drinks. So do you just want to give us a quick kind of five-minute kind of potted background to IKO, kind of what kind of made you start it up and kind of where you are in your journey?
Yeah. So IKO is a natural energy drink made from Yerba Mate. Yerba is a South American farm that comes from Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. It's a natural stimulant. So the difference between coffee and Yerba Mate is that Yerba Mate doesn't sort of trip you out and jack you up. So you don't get the same anxiety that you might from coffee, normal can drink.
So you kind of call it that feel-good natural energy, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the energy drink without the.
Okay, so they're not the kind of the come down downsides of having an exceedingly stupid amount of caffeine, kind of 3-4 in a day kind of conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So what kind of made you kind of start the business? What was the reason behind getting IKO off the ground?
Yeah, so I had this is going back about 2 years now. I'd reached the end of an 8-year road working in insurance. I left university, as most people often do, with absolutely no idea what they want to do. And so having come out of that, I just chose something that was not too hard on the hours, relatively decent pay that I could wrap my head around, and that was it. There was no purpose really behind it, but then at that time I didn't think that was necessary. So 8 years went by, and as those years went by, it just began to grind on me. Eventually, it just became clear that there was no way that kind of a lifestyle was going to make me happy. So I took 5 months out to completely reconsider everything. And as happens, as is the way of life, the second you realize that what's not for you and commit to finding what is, things just happen. Things just seem to happen that fall into place naturally. So for me, that was a conversation with a friend of mine who was big into her herbal medicines and herbal remedies. And so at the time, it was purely with a commercial hat on. I was thinking about this plant, which I'd never heard of. I started drinking it. 2 weeks later, just the tea I was drinking, the change was so extraordinary and so total, unlike anything else I'd ever tried. Not someone who's usually particularly sensitive to, say, a herbal remedy. But this blew me away. And so the next thought I had was, this is so completely unavailable in the UK. So if I don't give this a go, I'll spend the rest of my life kicking myself.
Rafe, I'm keen to understand a little bit more about that self-exploration journey. I think a lot of entrepreneurs and co-founders go through that journey of, okay, where I am right now, I'm not happy. I need to make a change. Tell me a little bit more about that, being as vulnerable as you care to be, because I think there's a massive learning here for many owner founders that actually, if you're not happy, there is an out. there is an alternative. How did you finally decide that actually you needed to make the jump and you needed to try something different?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I'm very happy to be totally vulnerable around this, actually. This is so important. I mean, it's a funny one because I look back and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it weren't for those 8 years. So in a sense, we all need to go through whatever crap we're going to have gone through to get where we're going, which sounds like a very obvious statement, and it is, but it's amazing how much we struggle against it. So I think if you're in a position where you feel like enough's enough in whatever it is that you're doing, but you don't have a direction in which to go from there, if that makes sense. Like, you don't have any ideas of what's next, but you just know what you're not happy with now. That's in my view, a perfectly reasonable reason to get out there and just take a leap of faith and see what happens, because that's essentially what I did. I got out of what I was doing knowing that it wasn't for me. I took 5 months to just completely reassess. I had absolutely no money in my bank account. I was still in horrendous amounts of debt. But I knew that I needed the time. And sure enough, I think that by giving myself that time and trusting myself to do what was necessary, actually I made sure that everything worked out in a subconscious way, if that makes sense.
I've been talking a lot this morning about self-realization and understanding and those kind of demons that you battle. And so I'm really keen, Rafe, if okay with you, just to dive in a little bit deeper into that 5-month period in terms of, were you reading a lot? Were you studying? Were you listening to podcasts? That self-development journey, what did that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, meditation has always been my main go-to. So I started doing a lot of other things as well. But for me, meditation has just become this grounding exercise that if I don't do it every day, I can feel now. I'm aware of the fact that I'm more anxious, I'm more jittery. So exploring that, I think I used to meditate about 10 minutes a day for quite a few years now, about 6 years. But after I decided to really commit to finding what I wanted to do with my life, what I really wanted to do with it, then that practice has become so much more important. Because what it's allowed me to do is not just sit and in that half an hour every morning to be chilled out. I think that's what lots of people consider all of these practices to be, just about chilling out. The reality is whether it's meditation or yoga or journaling or whatever it is, any kind of a practice, taking a cold shower in the morning, any of these things, they're all about bringing you into awareness of what's happening right now. And actually, if you're able to do that, it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter if you're going to fail entirely. The point is, by being present and aware, the next thing will be okay.
And that's the key takeaway, right? It's about being present in the moment and understanding where you are and your purpose of being where you are today, as opposed to the angst of what might happen, and that self kind of perpetual state where you just go, okay, oh, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. Well, crumbs, none of that has happened. Actually, let's just get yourself present and in the moment and tackle the challenges that are here in front of us, as opposed to what may be. So I absolutely love that. And I think there's a massive story there for many owner founders to kind of learn from, is that actually taking that little bit of time for yourself, while it's super important to keep pushing the brand and taking it and growing it and getting to where you want to get to, there's a lot to be said for just enjoying the journey and taking a moment to look around you and say, yeah, I am climbing Everest, but actually I'm 15 meters up. And wow, isn't it a wonderful view? And let's enjoy that journey, as opposed to just slogging our way to the top. And the time you get there, you can't enjoy it because you're burnt out.
Yeah, and on a practical level as well, if you're not present, you'll miss things. You'll miss the moments where actually, as a founder, when it's hell for leather, you're wearing about 15 different hats in the business, everything's moving so fast. So if you're present in those moments, there'll be plenty of times where actually what's called for is patience. And that's the last thing you think to do, is be patient and wait when everything's going so fast. And I think, if I hadn't been, I probably would have packed it in by now, actually. because there's been these big things that have happened, or months where absolutely nothing was going on, where if I hadn't had that patience and just presence and literally breathing through those months, I probably would have just given it up for a bad job by now, you know.
Because so many people kind of look at it
trust
differently.
Any kind of practice like that is just cultivating those things.
Yeah, so many people, so many owner founders, and you know what you kind of come across in terms of these entrepreneurial gurus kind of talk about, you know, you've got to really hustle, you've got to push it, you've got to do X, Y, Z. But actually, slow time, as someone said to me before, is just as you said yourself. It's so important to reflect back on, you know, your successes. You know, if the classic people that, you know, the Magellans of the world, the guys that traveled the world finding continents from Spain, etc., you know, the Marco Polo's kind of scenarios, if they'd thought about the end journey, they didn't know what they were going to create. They had a goal that I want to go and find stuff. I want to go and do something. That's where it is. You know, I talk about setting your flags to the team that we have here at the Armory, about kind of don't constantly look for the flag 60 miles away. Try and just set every little stage that you take, set yourself a flag and say that's a success. Because actually, as an owner founder, if you don't do that, you'll constantly bash yourself into the ground around, well, I'm not getting to where I want to be quick enough, or I'm not doing this as well as I could be. Whereas in fact, you've done 50 things this week or 20 things this month that are just massively changing your business. And I suppose you're quite early in the journey in terms of launching your product. But actually, just before we went live, you were talking about this as, you know, the 18 months in terms of kind of getting this to a position of going live has been, you know, it's 18 months is a, you know, a reasonable amount of time. So what's kind of been the biggest steps and challenges you've kind of taken through those kind of 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are sort of the practical ones, just the hard, gritty lessons about, you know, for example, I had absolutely no idea about everything or anything that was involved in importing a product direct from Brazil, which is what I'm doing. So rather than going through, there were plenty of very easy options here to get my yerba mate through a UK supplier who'd get it through a EU supplier who'd get it through a, you know, a Brazilian or an Argentinian supplier, say. But I decided, actually, because of the purpose behind me doing this, that little something I was talking about that will keep me going at this is regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. So I decided that actually I wasn't going to be able to implement any kind of change if I didn't have a direct relationship with the growers. Okay. So in that experience, I think, you know, there's a soft side and a practical side. The soft side for me was, you know, just learning about giving time and patience to those relationships. You know, there's been a language barrier. Yerba mate is such a strong tradition in that part of the world, and as someone who's recently discovered that, there's also that to consider. You know, putting it in an energy drink, it's a funnier one, because it's not as if they're not going to sell me the product as a result, but there's still an emotional thing to go through that, and an explanation that I want to give behind, you know, no, this isn't the traditional way of consuming it, but here's the long-term goal, here's what I'm setting out to do. You know, and that's been a kind of interesting one that I didn't expect to be so powerful. And then on the practical side, just importing that product, there were several moments where I could genuinely accidentally have brought the entire business down before it had even begun. You know, the customs declaration piece, I just had I was totally clueless. I just thought, well, we'll import it. They provided me with all the information, the documents needed. And then suddenly it looked like I'd need an accreditation from the Soil Association for the product, and that was going to take 3 months. And meanwhile, I had this product stuck in Heathrow Airport, and they were going to charge me 150 quid a day. It was a nightmare. It was an absolutely terrifying moment. But sure enough, you know, you just, rather than panicking, I sat there and just breathed for about 10 minutes and I sort this. And sure enough, actually, we got the whole thing sorted in 24 hours in the end. Wow. But there were so many problems suddenly all at once that none of which I had any clue about where to begin on. And I think in most of these situations, it actually turns out that 90% of those problems are not problems.
Rafe, how did you sort it? I'm just keen to know. I know there's a lot of people listening to this that actually are probably going to go through exactly the same challenge. I'm sure there's a massive learning in terms of, look, you've already trodden this path. And that's one thing James and I are always talking about is mentorship and consultancy, and actually follow those that have already done what you're looking to do. So you've had the challenge, your product's stuck in customs in Heathrow. They're going to charge you a lot of money per day. What's the solution? How did you get out of it?
Yeah. So, well, the first thing was knowing that I didn't understand this stuff, and taking the decision to spend some money to avoid spending even more money, right? So I found a customs agent at the last minute who kind of dealt with this kind of intense situation, and they're expensive, but I knew what I was paying not to pay, if that makes sense. So that was very helpful. Then the other piece, I think, the ingredient supplier was the one who advised me that they thought that I needed a soil association accreditation in order to import the product. Now, that advice, I assumed that they were right on that, because I assumed they know what they're doing and I don't, right? As in, I think with lots of food and drink founders especially, they don't necessarily have any experience in the food and drink industry. So you kind of assume everyone else is the expert. So that terrified me. And I thought, well, 3 months to get this thing done. And I was looking at £4,000 on just the accreditation costs alone. And so in the end, actually, I looked into what was my product. That's the one thing that I know everything about and no one else does, is my product. And I managed to get in touch with someone from the Soil Association, describe the issue. They said, do you want your product to be organic? And I was like, well, no, but the product that I'm ordering from Brazil is organic. And they said, okay, well, are you saying that the product itself is organic, or do you just want to list this particular ingredient on the back as organic? I said the latter. They said, that's fine. You don't need to do this. So it's things like that. It was, what I'm getting at is there can often be confusing situations where you're given some advice, or it feels like you're being given some advice that's concrete and unarguable. And because you're swamped in not knowing anything in a particular situation or scenario, you kind of tend to assume that, all right, well, we'll just go with that because they must be right. So I think it's always worth just delving, well, putting any problem in the context of the one thing that you know about, which is your product. And I think you'll always be amazed at the kind of issues you can solve with that. For example, do you need a particular ingredient? Can you change a particular supply chain? Any number of things like that.
Everyone will say you've got to do your homework before you enter into a product, but sometimes you can't cover everything. You can't know everything. Nathan's point, I think, is very interesting. Actually, you made the point that sometimes these things, getting in someone with experience to kind of help you through a problem can be expensive. But actually, as you said, it's the cost of loss. So for you to spend £4,000 on the accreditation and then 150 quid a day, which, for 3 months is no small feat. I'm not going to try and do the maths in my head, but it's, you were talking kind
it's
of
a lot of money
or so. Yeah. It's a lot of money. It's got noughts. So it's, the cost of loss of paying someone a couple of days at, 900 quid a day, £1,000 a day has just saved you £12,000. So, it is sometimes it's the short-term win, and knowing there are people out there and being comfortable that there are people that know in certain situations more than we do. And, Nathan and I would be quite happy to admit it, but there are absolutely loads of things that we know very little about. And so we have to go and ask the question, and we're always working with mentors and people to help us through situations as well. How do you find the mentoring process? Do you have a mentor that you look towards, or do you have someone in your circle of whether it's a non-exec or someone like that? Have you managed to find someone who can kind of help you through this journey you're going through?
Yes, yeah. So funnily enough, I've gone for 2 younger guys who have both been successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs at different times in their own right. Been enormously helpful for me. Because the other thing is, I think one thing worth considering, and it depends from person to person, is the softer side of that relationship and the dynamics of it. What I mean is, let me give you an example. So if you're going to choose a psychotherapist, I think this is a powerful example. If you're going to choose a psychotherapist, there's, you need to consider who's the person that you are willing to take some pretty heavy duty, personal and vulnerable advice from. And for me, it's the same kind of consideration with a mentor. So there's the experience element. Obviously, at some stage in the near future, I will get on board a mentor who is, a grey-haired master in the field of some form. But for now, I felt like being in this situation where I'm in an industry which I have no experience in, and I'm actually, the most important thing for me is to be stepping up into that confident place of leading this business. And for me, actually, the most helpful advisors at this stage, at least, closer to my own age, who were experienced in this early stage of the business, who had failed as much as they had, and so who could share in the experience a lot more with me, rather than just giving sort of practical, technical, experienced advice. So for me, I consider that, these guys as infinitely more valuable right now at this stage than perhaps, a grey-haired, more experienced, more wizened mentor would be. But at some stage very soon, no doubt, the need will then switch over for me to have one of those much more experienced style mentors.
I really love that example, and I always say it's a horses for courses piece. And actually, we always talk about a plus equals minus model, e.g., people that are further on that have been there, seen it, done it. People that are that peer-to-peer learning is equally as important, but also those who are a little bit further earlier on in the journey that you can start to mentor, so you can pass and learn from as well. So there's really important to get that blend, and I'm sure that will come. One thing I'm really keen to learn from yourself is the channel mix that you've gone through in terms of getting this product to market. We've talked about physically getting the product to the UK, but now in terms of getting the product into the hands of your kind of customers, I'll be interested to know what channels have you used that have allowed you to do that. Have you been particularly strong on social? I know from looking through your social channels, that seems to be one of the strongest avenues. But tell us a little bit more about that route to market.
Yeah, so funny enough, we're still 100% online at the moment, but I'm having conversations all the time with retailers of various forms. So funnily enough, that's been a bit of an evolution in its own right. I mean, in food and drink, at least, there seems to be a pretty standard route to market, which tends to go something like your online D2C plus independent little coffee shops, and then you evolve into specialty retailers, people like Planet Organic and Whole Foods, Selfridges. Then from there, eventually you go out into the larger grocers. So I spoke to the sort of Planet Organic and Whole Foods some time ago now, and they were all very, very turned on by the brand. They really, really liked it. They liked the taste of it, but of course the commercial side of it, it's way too early for them, and that's fine. It's totally understandable. So I think, for me, the channel strategy has evolved from just hearing this positive nose, basically. We're excited about this product, but we can't make it make sense yet to take that much of a risk. And obviously you sit in a position of going, okay, that makes total sense. So then now the position I'm taking is highly, highly strategic. I'd like to target some highly specific locations around London, possibly in a couple of other cities as well. If it makes sense for me to work with go to a wholesaler before going and getting some independent coffee shops, for example, on the roster, we'll do that if it makes sense to supply those independent coffee shops direct first, which will cost me a lot more. But, you know, early loss for later gain, then we'll do that. And it's sort of, the way I'm taking this is a gentle evolution just in terms of who's picking it up, because the most important thing for me right now is working out who the target customer, and that's going to take some time. That requires some patience, because the point is, it's not going to be a case of me choosing my target customer. The customers will choose the drink, and I'm already being surprised by who those are. So in a sense, the next 6 to 9 months for me are product testing and just seeing how the market takes the product. So in a sense, I'm following this business. I'm not leading it, you know.
Right, that's a really interesting little snippet there in terms of following, not leading, and actually that patience piece comes back into the equation. E.g., you know what? Let's not go in with any stereotypes about our market is between 18 to 30, and they've got to be male or female, and they've got to do X or Y. Actually, the market will be dictated by who buys it, and then we will adjust comms and marketing accordingly. I think that makes perfect sense, and I'll be interesting to see how are you going about tracking that. What are you doing it? Because again, a lot of brands are going to be like, this guy's speaking so much sense, but at the same time, I've got no clue where to start in terms of tracking that. So how do brands go about on that journey? E.g., are you using certain tools or softwares, or what are you doing to track that followership to say, you know what, in 12 months time, you will know your audience?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I had assumed that there would be all sorts of fantastic data sources that we could use and break down. The reality is that the analytics on things like Instagram and Facebook are great to a point, but they never go into as much depth as you want to get into in terms of discovering those target customer early adopters. So actually, the best way I've found is literally just in the comments, reading comments of people who are interacting and engaging. You know, often if you get a flurry of follows off the back of one person buying your product, and presumably they're sharing it with their friends, just looking into, in a very hands-on way, looking into on social the personality types of those people. The wonderful thing about social media is that it does tend to reflect very heavily the personality type of each individual in one respect or another. So that it's pretty hands-on. It's pretty hands-on. But then the encouraging thing is there tend to be, I have found for me, that there are very, very clear, strong trends already in terms of the kinds of people picking it up, you know, and word of mouth, of course, is so strong. So, you know, I think it has to be hands-on for now, because when you're dealing with smaller numbers, you have to go deeper into those smaller numbers that you've got in order to gather some useful information and data about who they are. Once those numbers grow, then I presume that there are all sorts of clever bits of software that you can use to take some more macro views on who those people are.
I think it was the guy at Innocent Drinks that did that kind of bucket challenge, right? Where they just had those two different buckets and different flavors. And I love that kind of story, right? Where it's like, actually let the users decide. We'll come up with the kind of concept, but actually then we'll take it to market and they will decide about where we follow. So yeah, I think this is a really refreshing approach, and hopefully brands that are listening are thinking, actually, how can we weave this into our strategy and our route to market, that actually we will come up with a concept, but actually then we will let the market decide and then develop from there, and include a period of market testing, as opposed to just going all the way down the line with, it's going to be this flavor, it's going to be this packaging, it's going to be this, get it to market. Actually, there's no need for it in the market, or there's no appetite, because that you've totally missed the boat. And James, I know you guys do a lot of that with your brand exploration piece in terms of user testing and finding out a bit more about the audience.
It's you know, one of the, I love the way you're saying, you know, it's that not hand to mouth, but you know, it's physically getting in there and doing it. You know, have you found yourself sitting in the back of a stockist or a cafe that has got the product, looking at who's picking up the product yet and drinking it, buying it, that kind of stuff? That's so important. We've done it with, you know, we often, when we're going to do customer surveys for a brand, because they've said, yeah, we know exactly who our customer is, and Google Analytics is telling us this data, etc. And then we do a customer survey, and it skews it completely. because they don't see the people in the household. You just see the stats that sit behind it. You don't see the personalities, the nuance of the what we call the attitudinal, the behavioural traits of those customers. So, you know, one of the things we did with a retailer about kind of 6 months ago is just before the shops kind of closed down, you can actually see people going into the shop, picking up one of their bags and walking out, for example. You then see the other bags they're carrying, the other products they're munching or eating or whatever, and you can then start to get an idea of who your, not competitors are, but who your kind of collaborative product set is. So what other products are they buying? What other brands are they kind of buying into? What shops are they walking into? You kind of get thrown out occasionally of fashion stores by sitting by the changing rooms, but that's beside the point. So what have you found from a marketing initiative? So outside of the sales channels, you've talked a little bit about social, and Nathan kind of alluded to it earlier. How have you found? Because some people say social is great for broadcast, but it never really drives sales. Or we're getting loads of sales from it. Can we quantify that question? You know, how have you? What channels have you found have really kind of helped you start that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's done the most for us this early on social has been just being very different, looking very different, and the whole feel of the brand is very different to every other sort of health and wellness category drink out there. So funnily enough, with something like this, yerba mate, it's a new kind of a plant that's ram-packed full of all the good stuff. You know, I think most people would suspect that to look a certain way and to be marketed by a certain audience. So one of the first group of people we went to online were the vegan fitness wellness crowd. And we sent out quite a few samples, and it was well received, and they often, like most of the time, they seem to like the taste. You know, then they liked the effect. But what was very clear is that none of them felt like they could place it, because it didn't look like your sort of standard pastel colored, pretty writing, sort of digestible, social, postable product. So it was something slightly different. It had a bit more of an edge to it, and so people found it. Those kinds of people found it difficult to place, because also you've got to remember that they're all being approached by tons of brands all the time, and they can take their pick. So that was interesting. What we did find eventually was the kinds of people picking up the brand. This is still evolving, of course, but we've got music producers, inline skaters, so free skaters, rollerbladers. We've got artists and people working with some sort of creative skill generally, like jewelers. There's all sorts of this. And so what we've started to do is, instead of lunging out at where we might expect it to go, we've followed where it's going and trying to work out what's the trend here. And what I think seems to be working out is there's some sort of creative aspect to all of these people who are looking for something a little bit different, a little bit off trend, actually. So, I mean, this journey continues. But again, it comes back to this follow, don't lead. The market will take your brand however it's going to take it. And to be honest, you've got absolutely nothing to do with that once it's out there. You know, You've just got to follow where it goes. You know, perhaps
riding the crest of a wave almost, aren't you? You're trying to, you know, who knows where the wave's going to break, who knows where the wave's going to take you, how far it's going to take you inshore. But you're kind of really navigating, trying to ride the best as you can the crest of this wave as you kind of go through. So taking that creative lead, this kind of communities emerging around you. Have you thought anything around, you know, what would be your perfect endorsement, your perfect collaborator? Have you kind of dived into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, it of course at this early stage it changes all the time, but there's one that just sticks in my mind a lot, and I'll explain it. Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson is always the one that pops up whenever I get asked this question. It's often one that I get asked by marketing agencies to help them sort of envisage the whole feel of the brand. But yeah, Woody Harrelson, because the whole point with this energy drink is it's more kickback and feel good. And there's something about this guy, Woody Harrelson. He's a highly respected actor. He's in a lot of fantastic stuff, yet he is known for turning up to the Oscars in his dressing gown. Sort of, you know, he knows when to give a shit and when not to take life so seriously, you know. So I liked that sort of an idea. But of course, this keeps evolving. So at the moment, you know, there is some of these music producers who are not necessarily the most famous people in the world, but among their particular audience, their particular genre of music, they're rapidly becoming more and more and more well known. And that's quite interesting because those guys are highly engaged, albeit with a smaller audience. Much more highly engaged.
Just a question. You say about follow, not lead, yet actually everything you've done apart from the marketing has been leading, not following. E.g., you've gone with a new plant, you've gone over to Brazil, you've not gone the easy way. You've literally bucked the trend with everything apart from the marketing. So I'm keen to understand that, and just get across to the audience that actually there are times to follow, not lead, and there are times to lead, not follow. And it's just about knowing when to do which one, as opposed to always following for everything and always leading for everything. Yes, don't reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, when it comes to the product, you have to differentiate and be different. Otherwise, you're not going to stand out. And that goes to your packaging, that goes to your product itself, etc. So in terms of the follow, not lead matrix, do you feel like you've got the perfect split between the times you have followed and the times you have led? Or do you think actually looking back, God, I should have just followed that time, or I should have just led that time because we would have got there a bit quicker?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I mean, you can never get the balance just right. You can never get the balance just right. I mean, there's always room for improvement. And I think perhaps a better way of putting it, rather than follow, don't lead, because that I totally admit that can be misleading, because you do have to lead as much as you follow. A better way of putting it perhaps is respond, don't react. Because what I mean by follow, don't lead is that you, in a sense, you are in certain moments, you choose to respond to whatever's happening already, rather than reacting in the moment to what's happening. So leading when you should be following looks like you're knee-jerk reacting to something, which is never going to get you a favorable result, at least not intentionally. It'll be an accident if you get a favorable result from that. By responding, actually what you've done is you've waited, you've sort of waited for the right conditions to arise. And then in seeing what's happening, you sort of stepped up and responded calmly and chosen highly strategically what the next thing to do is. So that's the kind of respond, don't react is perhaps a slightly better way of putting that.
And Rafe, we've talked today about the story and everything that's gone before, but actually I'm keen to share and understand a little bit about what the future is going to look like. Yeah. Where is the brand going? What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you guys? Not just in terms of where the product's going to be, routes to market, etc., but also in terms of hires. I mean, that's a big one for me, is so many retailers don't know when their first hire is going to be and where it's going to be. Have you already mapped that out, or are you still yet to see where that first hire is going to go?
Yeah, so funny enough, it's one of those things that's continuously being mapped out. I have a generally good idea. It's one of these things that's evolved. For a while, when I was setting up, I was actually looking for my first hire to be a partner, a co-founder.
Yep.
As it turned out, as time went on, that was more a confidence issue in myself. Was I sort of wanted someone to lean on and validate me. Yep. So as time's moved on, actually, I've realized that's not what I need. And I just instead needed to find that confidence myself, and that journey continues. So the first hire instead now is just kind of evolving into, do I need someone with lots of experience that I don't have to complement me? Or actually, do I need someone with just the passion who can learn alongside me? What's going to make more sense? And I don't yet know the answer to that. But I think, it's going to depend a lot on what happens in terms of our growth. If we explode overnight, it will almost definitely make sense for me to have someone who's highly experienced to get in there and just take a lot of the pressure off. If it's a more gentle evolution, which is about being strategic, making highly strategic moves, I'd rather have someone who's got that passion and willingness to learn alongside me, because actually, to be successfully strategic, as I've learnt, you don't necessarily need to be an expert in the field. In fact, it may even be more of an advantage not to know how things are usually done.
Yeah, there's definitely this bit around whenever you talk to someone who's kind of done it for years, it's kind of, well, that's just the way it's done. When in fact, the whole reason for kind of breaking the mold is to do exactly that. You kind of, if you don't know the answer, then you kind of make up the answer, and sometimes it's far more efficient or far more effective than the route to market. It's like you were talking about the channel mix that you go into. The traditional route of putting a food and beverage brand into the market is this, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for your product or for your customer, does it? So that kind of makes sense. The first hire is always an interesting question, because it can either be, do I spend the money on a experienced person, or do I get a doer? Do I get a people that will sit underneath me and really kind of grow with us as a business? Because being an owner founder, as a sole owner founder, can be a lonely journey. Unless you have people you can kind of, hence the kind of mentoring kind of question, is there someone there that you can kind of go to and ask the question for, and what does that look like for you? You got someone to lean on in many ways, whinge at, argue with, discuss, kind of, how, because family often plays a part of that. How does your kind of, without prying too much, has your family kind of really kind of supported you on this journey? Because some owner founders find it's often the first part they kind of lean on.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because obviously this depends from person to person. But for me, in the very earliest days, I didn't have total support from the family.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fear, basically, because I'd never worked in this industry before, and basically I just had this wild idea of bringing this plant that no one had ever heard of to the UK. But over the course of the last 18 odd months, I think their support has grown with just my dealing with more and more situations and showing that commitment, coming up with this seemingly impossible task of sourcing a very specific kind of yerba mate from another continent when we're all locked down in the UK. And then as they see me working through that, I got sort of more and more support from them. So now the support is total. But again, that's, I think, like so much else, was just a steady evolution.
Yeah,
I think that's always going to be the case, right? That they're going to be worried about the unknown. And I think that's a journey that many entrepreneurs go on, where those around them actually can sometimes be the most negative source. You're trying to focus on positivity, and yet you've always got, not only have you got the self-doubts nagging at you, which you try and contain, but then you've also got those nearest and dearest saying, oh, you should be doing this, or why don't you do this, or just go down the easy route. And actually that's one of the biggest challenges as an owner founder, is to really stay on that course and remain motivated. And actually for a lot of people, that negativity or uncertainty is sometimes that motivation to prove people wrong, to say, you know what, mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever it is, didn't think I was capable of doing this. That's actually going to spur me on to really take this to the next level, because I will prove them and everyone else wrong that I am capable of doing it. And I mean, the journey sounds like it's been a remarkable one, and I'd love to come back in kind of 12 months and just see just how far it's grown. I think if you can get to where you've got to in the midst of a pandemic and everything else, then God knows where this is going to be in 12 months' time. But with all that energy, hopefully with things a bit easier, this is going to be an incredibly exciting journey to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated to see as well, because again, there's that strong element of planning where things are going. But then, of course, I'm also aware that there's a huge element where it could end up somewhere completely different, and I'm sort of ready for either of those things. So I'm as interested as you are to find out where we are in 12 months.
One thing I would just say is that the final bit from me before we come to JD to wrap up is really about one of the biggest learnings I ever took as an owner founder, was around writing a letter to myself. E.g., writing a letter that I opened in 12 months' time to say, I'm going to achieve this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I then locked it away for you. And I never forget, when the person told me to do this, who was a mentor of mine at the time and still a good friend, I thought, what a ridiculous idea. I did it. And oh my God, was it ridiculously scary when you're like, okay, well, that happened and I did that and I did that. So I do encourage you just to write that letter to your future self, lock it away in a cupboard, and in a year's time, let's open it live and read it. And we'll be like,
do that
oh,
right now. Yeah, absolutely.
there we go.
Do it.
Let's
do it.
Yeah, idea. Yeah, brilliant.
I daren't do that because I'm not entirely sure my age. I'm going to have another couple of years. No. Oh, bloody hell. Rafe, thank you so much. We're kind of drawing to a close now, but thank you so much.
Sure.
You know, being so open on the call, and you know, this being the first in our founder for founder series almost as part of brand design. So thank you from myself, and I'm sure absolutely thank you from Nathan. And we wish you all the well on your journey on your journey into the drinks stratosphere. I'll see you in Waitrose near me very soon, I'm sure.
Yeah,
so
mate, once again,
have a great rest of the week, and
you too.
We'll speak to you very soon.
Massive thanks, Ray. Take care.
Guys.
Cheers.
You too, mate.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Nathan, great first session with Rafe there from IKO Drinks. We've got a load more coming up in this series. We're going to be hopefully talking to Ted Bell next. In the series from Freddy's Flowers, and getting under the skin of how they started that business and some of the challenges they went through. So until next time, you can catch up with Brand Designs through any of the podcast channels or live through either YouTube, or we'll be posting these on LinkedIn Live as well, so you can follow in the series in there. So have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you very soon. Out from me.
Thanks again, guys. Take care.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.